Sunday school leader. We are toward the end of July. School's just going to start in a couple of weeks, and the summer has just gone by. Where'd it go? All right, what's coming up? Remember, we're continuing in the unit that's called Living a Godly Life in an Ungodly World. We're in the second lesson called Depend on God out of 2 Chronicles chapter 14, verses 9 through 15. And the point of the lesson is that God is greater than any challenge we face. I think this week's prep talk is going to be considerably shorter than most because as I looked through the material, there wasn't really a lot more to comment on that wasn't really in your lesson book. But here we go. Remember, so we're continuing in this study of 2 Chronicles chapters 14 through 17, looking primarily at King Asa. If you remember last week, we looked at him and what he did and how that relates to us, how we should pursue godliness. So this week we're looking at being dependent upon God. You know, when you fill out your taxes, you list those dependents. You list those kids or other people who are dependent upon you. They depend upon you to provide for them. And so that's what we're looking at this week, being dependent upon God for him to provide for us. Now, last week, if you remember, King Asa experienced a period of 10 years of peace. And what we got in this lesson this week is the first recorded battle after that time of peace. Now, as you look through the lesson, you'll see several Old Testament names, places. Be sure and rehearse those before you go into class and try not to stumble on them. I know even when I practice, I sometimes in class will fumble around on a word, and that's a little embarrassing. So just remember, say it with confidence, and probably nobody will know the difference. All right, if you use the leader kit, there's a map in there. I would use that or print off a biblical map relating to this time period so students can kind of see and get in their mind where these different places are. You know, some people are visual learners, and so that helps them place geographical places and all that. And, you know, Sunday school is primarily a time of auditory listening. So remember, people learn in different ways, so try to incorporate some of the other senses, visual especially, whenever you can. So this Cushite army came against King Asa. And it says there, in the NIV at least, that there was a million strong. Literally, in the Hebrew, that's 1,000 thousands. And so Asa saw he was vastly outnumbered. He was definitely an underdog. And so can you think of any other underdogs in the Bible? Well, you got David. Okay, he was the youngest in the clan. He was the one that became king. Then you got also David again, or actually before he became king, David standing up against Goliath. You've got Gideon, who had that army that he kept whittling down to 300 that went against the enemy. You've got the boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish, who his small meal was used to feed thousands of people. See, this goes right along with 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27, when Paul says that God uses the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and the weak things of the world to shame the strong. And how can that be? Well, think of it like this. God is greater than everything else combined. All right, so you got Asa's army, and it's definitely smaller than, weaker than the Cushite army. But with God on Asa's side, nothing's impossible. Also related to that is 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 47, that says, all those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, but the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. The battle is the Lord's. Also related to Psalm 20, verse 7, that says, some trust in horses, some trust in chariots, but we will trust in the name of the Lord our God. We will trust in, we will depend upon God. But you know, there is an element of personal responsibility too, isn't there? If you remember in last week's lesson, during this time of peace, that's 10 years of peace, Asa took that time to fortify his cities. Also, in our text today, he marched up to him in battle formation. You know, he just didn't sit back and presume that God's going to fight for him and just sit back and not do anything. No, he took responsibility as well, but he still depended upon God. So what can we learn about Asa's prayer when he prayed to the Lord? Well, first of all, he recognized God's ability to save them. He said, Lord, there is no one besides you to help us. He also recognized his inability. We depend on you, he said. Also, his prayer was specific. He didn't just start praying and beat around the bush and you know our need better than we do, God, and finally end up with it. No, it basically was what? Help us. Okay, in that time of desperation, help us. It wasn't a prayer of fancy many words. It was help us, God. So he had impossible odds against him. That led to an unlikely victory. And that led to an incredible gain, as you read down toward the end of our text this week about all the loot that they got as a result of this. So when you pray for your class this week, as I encourage you to do every week, please be specific when you pray. Okay, be like Asa, be specific. What does your class as a whole need? What are some needs of your Sunday school class? Also, what are some needs of some of the individuals in your class? Is there anyone you can specifically call on this week to be an encouragement, to let them know, to encourage them to depend on God? All right. Next week, we're going to be looking, as we continue on here in 2 Chronicles, we're going to be looking in chapter 15, looking at act with courage. So I hope you have a great week. We're having a cool front here in Southeast Arkansas, and I hope you guys are too. Have a great Sunday.